Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
The federal election is more than halfway done, with voting day set for April 28th. While many of us took civics classes in school, it's not uncommon to have some simple questions about the voting process and election laws here in Canada. What do I need to bring when I vote? Can I take a picture of my ballot and post it online? What happens if I make a mistake when I attempt to mark my X? Can I vote before Election Day? Does my job have to give me time off work to vote? How many political parties are there in Canada? And can an election be postponed? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with Dianne Benson with Elections Canada, who's here to answer these questions and many more in a Voting 101 episode. Dianne, thanks very much for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with a basic question. Who can vote on April 28th, and what do people need to bring with them when they vote?
You need to be a Canadian citizen and 18 years of old on election day. So even if your birthday was in the week before and you went to an advance poll, you'd be okay. You just need to be 18 years old on election day. And you need to be registered to vote. And what that means is you need to have the ID that proves who you are and where you live. That's because in Canada, we vote according to where we live, and we vote for a candidate. We don't vote for a political party. Sometimes people think that we do, but really you're voting for a local candidate.
And now in terms of the ID, what are the requirements there?
The easiest thing to do is if you have a driver's license. Photo ID is not required, but a driver's license, as an example, is a piece of government ID that has your name and has your address. So if you can do it with one piece, that's easy. If you don't have a driver's license, and a lot of people don't, then you need to look at other options. And there are extensive lists on the website that can fit almost anybody's circumstance. But basically, then you need two pieces of ID. Each of them has to have your name, and at least one has to have your address. So you could have a credit card and a utility bill, for example. That would prove, again, what we need to prove is where you live.
The voter ID that we get in the mail, that could potentially be one of the pieces of ID used to confirm who you are. But if you don't get that in the mail or you lose it, you can still go out and vote.
Right now, you're seeing these voter information cards that we get coming into the mail, into your mailbox. And the one piece of advice I would say for people is stick that on the fridge, because it'll come to the day where you want to go and vote and you're looking around for it and it has really important information. First off, you want to look at it right away to make sure it has the right name and the right address. Sometimes things can get mailed to a previous tenant if you're a renter, for example. And in those cases, we want you to contact us, contact the local returning office, because they're going to fix that up and make sure that they get all the information right. But if you have that voter information card with you, it will tell you where you're going to vote and what the voting days are. It'll also give you a little reminder about bring your ID. And you can use that voter information card as a proof of address. So if you needed two pieces of identification, that could be one that proved your address, and then you need another piece that would prove who you are, something with your name on it. So it's a useful card. And the other part where it can come in handy is when you go to the voting location, you hand that card to the staff and they can easily process you. So we're trying to make sure that we give you the information you need so that when you do go to the polls, you're in and out, you're processed, and it takes very little time.
And what about vouching?
There is one third option in the suite of options you have for proving who you are and where you live. There are some people, for example, unhoused electors, who don't have anything that has their address on it because they are currently without a residence. And it can also happen for students, for example, because you're going to have a group of students who live in the house and one of them looks after the bills, pays the utility bill. They have a piece with their name and address, but the rest of the students in the house don't. So for people who don't have that, you can get a letter of confirmation. And we work with soup kitchens, for example, to have the administrators provide a letter giving confirmation of address to someone, or with schools where residents, where students are staying, they can write a letter. So you could go and have that. But if you had absolutely no identification and nothing, you could go with someone who lives in the same riding as the same polling division as you, who has ID. They can go to the polls with you and they could vouch for you. So there is a way, even if you don't have ID, that we will try to help you prove who you are and where you live.
For this election, election day is April 28th, but when else and how else can people vote?
Right now, as soon as the election is launched, actually, and the returning offices are open, you can vote by something called special ballot. And you can go into your returning office and fill out this paper ballot. In the early days, you have to fill in the name of the candidate yourself. So there's a little bit of responsibility on your part to get the name of the candidate. You just can't put a party down. You have to say the candidate. But once the full confirmed list of electors of candidates is up, which it is now. All the candidates have filed their nomination paper and been approved. The documents have been approved by the returning officer, and they are now going to be on the ballot. So that list is there for you to refer to. You can vote by special ballot like this if maybe you're traveling, maybe you have to be away because of your job, or some other circumstance that you don't want to go and vote in person. You can vote by going to the returning office or applying online and get a ballot mailed to you. And in both those instances, you're voting by special ballot, filling in the name of the candidate, and then you mail that back to us.
What about advanced polling days? And is there going to be an issue? Because I understand it's going to happen over the Easter weekend. Is that going to be problematic because of, the fact that it's a religious moment and weekend for Christians across the country?
It's always a challenge to, in any election period, to not have some times that might be problematic for people. The days that the advanced polls are held are written in law, and there's very little leeway around when they can be changed. They are going to be held on the 4 days over Easter weekend, but I think, again, what we try to do is offer all these different options that if you were not able to go on those 4 days of the weekend, you have the special ballot. You could go into the returning office anytime. You still have the option of going on election day. The one thing about those 4 days that I would say is that there's more opportunity there. There are kids out of school who might want to work for Elections Canada if they chose. There's some flexibility there when people are not going to be on the job, that they have a little bit more time where they may choose to go and vote in an advance poll. And I would say the one thing that we have been seeing over the last probably 3 or 4 general elections is that more and more people choose to cast their ballot at an advance poll. And I think it's the flexibility. It's 4 days of 12 hours each. So there's lots of time for you to go at your own convenience. And we are seeing more and more that people are choosing that as the time when they cast their ballot.
Now, since you mentioned people who might have to work on election day, there are rules around employers giving time to vote. What are the details there?
An employer must give you 3 hours off for voting. But if let's say you start at 8 in the morning and you're done at 4 in the afternoon, the polls don't close till 9. You have a 3-hour window there after work to go to. Same thing if you're a shift worker, you might be working a 12-hour shift. If you worked 7 to 7, or that if there are times where you're not going to get that 3-hour window of the time when the polls are open, then your employer is required to allow you time to go and do that. But most people are probably not going to fall into that category if they work a regular kind of shift.
Okay, so what happens when somebody spoils a ballot? And if somebody doesn't do that on purpose, if they make a mistake, are they allowed to ask for a new ballot?
If you go to the polls and sometimes you might be given a ballot, maybe there's a tear in the corner or some printer ink. Those don't happen very often, but it can happen. You can ask for a new ballot. And you could also, if you said, I made a mistake or I did something or I smudged and you came back, the deputy returning officer can allow one replacement ballot to give you, and they track the spoiled ballot, as you call it. And we count those because we count every ballot that's printed. And at the end of the night, we have to know how many were in the box, how many were rejected or spoiled. So we keep a really close eye on those. But if you made just an honest mistake or you tore the ballot by accident when you were doing something with it behind the voting screen, you do get a kind of a one-time, we can give you another one.
And if they do anything but mark an X, does that then lead to a spoiled ballot? Like if I wrote Mickey Mouse at the bottom or something like that. So what constitutes what's spoiled and what's a clean ballot?
You don't have to put an X. You could put a check mark, but it has to stay within that circle beside the candidate's name. And the issue where you write something else on the ballot, like Mickey Mouse, as you were saying, if you write something else on the ballot or in any way indicate that it could be tied to you, the reason these measures are put in place is to ensure there's no bribery, for example, or intimidation, because if someone said, we want you to vote for this candidate, and we'll know because when the votes are counted, we will see something on the ballot that indicates you did. So there's a real amount of security and integrity around the ballot so that you're voting in secret. It's only you that knows what your vote is, and that secret vote goes in the ballot box, and who you voted for is not tied back to you.
Yeah, and to clarify for our listeners, no candidate or anybody can bribe you or coerce you into casting a ballot. That is against the law. But also, there's something else that pops up every election, it seems. Can you take a photo of your ballot and share it on social media? Is that allowed?
You cannot take a photo of your ballot and share it on social media because then the vote is no longer secret. And that would open you to the possibility of intimidation or bribery because you are showing proof of who you voted for. The secrecy of the vote is important for all of us, and keeping those votes secret is important for a democratic process. So you're more than welcome to come out outside of the voting booth or be outside of an Elections Canada office to take a selfie and said, I voted. We have stickers, I voted. All of that's great. The difference is you are not allowed to take a picture of who you voted for on the ballot.
So then what happens if Elections Canada is able to link that social media post to that ballot? Does that then become a spoiled ballot and doesn't count?
There is an independent commissioner who will investigate possible contraventions of the law. So it could be that gets referred to that office.
All right. Now, we're speaking about the secret ballot, and an organization for people with disabilities has raised concerns that people who can't physically mark an X are not being given their right to a secret ballot because the current voting method requires them to have somebody help them mark an X. What accommodations are made for people with disabilities who can't physically mark their X, and could potentially Elections Canada change the rules moving forward to give them more accessibility towards a secret ballot?
I think that the agency recognizes that there are groups who face more difficulties than others. And we do work and have consultations with representative groups to find ways that we can work to make it better for them. We did have a pilot project that we were trying to put in place for this election, or a project we were trying to put in place for this election that would address some of the concerns that people had about particularly sight-impaired voters who wanted to vote without assistance. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get it in place. This was a snap election. Things happen quickly, but our goal is to have a pilot project in place for a by-election coming up after the general election.
All right. What about refusing a ballot? Can Canadians show up to a polling station and officially refuse a ballot?
We don't really have that kind of a system here in Canada. I know there may be some areas where that is counted separately, but it wouldn't be counted like that. It wouldn't go in the ballot box. It would be the same as a ballot that got torn or a ballot that didn't work out and never gets in the box. So it would get counted in with these other things. It wouldn't get counted separately as a refused ballot. It's not something that we have in our Canadian election system.
More on the big story with Dianne Benson from Elections Canada, speaking about the voting process in just a moment. So we talked a lot about the voting process, but Canadians don't just have one or two or three or four or five choices. How many registered parties are there in Canada?
For this election, there are actually 16 registered parties. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to see all those parties on the ballot when you go to your particular voting station. That's because in general, history has shown that it's probably the more major parties who run a candidate in each riding. So some of these parties may have a candidate in a few ridings across Canada where they have a particular level of support or have a candidate that they want to put forward. But for most of us, we're going to see a somewhat smaller number of parties on our ballot in our riding.
Yes, and then there are also independent candidates that can run without affiliation to a political party.
That's correct. A candidate just has to meet a certain number of qualifications when they submit their nomination papers, and they are not required to run under a particular party banner.
What are the spending limits for candidates and for parties?
That varies. It's a calculation and a formula that is set in law, and it's designed to make a level playing field so that you don't have one party with a lot more money that can spend than others. So during the electoral period, there are caps for both political parties and for each of the candidates.
Where are candidates allowed to put up their signs, and where are Canadians allowed to display election signs?
In general, Elections Canada doesn't regulate where signs go and what the content is. The content, you just need to have what we call a tag. That means authorized by the official agent for, because each candidate has to have an official agent. We're all about making sure that the financing is in place and that everything's reported and everything meets the requirements for not spending too much. So the content of the signs is one thing. Where the signs can be placed, we kind of let that be a municipal, more local thing, because it's pretty hard across Canada. We have such a vast country with such different terrain. Trying to regulate where a sign can be placed is going to be a little challenging when we don't know locally. So it really is more where the signs are placed goes a bit more on local municipal rules.
How is Elections Canada dealing with misinformation, whether it be online or through maybe publications about the election?
It's interesting that you say misinformation.
Or disinformation.
There can be two things. Misinformation can sometimes just be that people have some wrong information about how you vote or where you vote. And our role is to make sure that you have the right information. So we do have quite an extensive ad campaign going on right now. We also have a social media presence, and we will put out a post or put out a tweet and say, hey, we see that you were saying that maybe election day is this day. It's actually this day. So we will try when we see things to correct that information. We also really encourage people to go to official sources of information, and for information about the election, it's Elections Canada. So we want you to come to our website. We have something called Electo Facts, and it's a web part of our webpage that where if you see something you think is wrong, you can look up and it will say, no, that's not correct. This is correct. So we are trying very much with the information that we can control and have access to, and that's within our mandate to correct that. At a greater level, there's a government effort with the coordination of a number of different agencies, and they work at a different level from us to counteract misinformation or disinformation as well.
On that note, every election we seem to get stories about people who get phone calls or text messages about polling locations being switched on election day, things like that. Can you clarify how Elections Canada would communicate such changes? And I think you've already mentioned as well, though, that if they're looking for information, they need to go to the website because that is a clear one. But clarify how you would express those changes if there were happen to be changes on election day.
I think that people sometimes are concerned if they get a text or a phone message from a political party, but political parties and candidates are allowed to contact electors that way. So getting a political message from a party is certainly allowed. I think if you're saying that there could be misinformation in this way, I think that is what we're saying to Canadians is make sure that you have the right information. Come to our website. We can give you the information. If you have any questions about your polling location, you can just enter your postal code and that information will pop up. You'll get the right information if you come to us.
All right. So if anyone gets those messages, head to the website and that will give you the accurate information. Excellent.
Yes.
Are candidates allowed to campaign at or near a polling station?
They can. There are rules around them campaigning around a polling place. There's some distance things, and you can't put up posters. So there are some regulations around that because what you want is when an elector goes to a polling place that they are there to make their own decision and not be influenced by things. So there really is an effort to keep that a clear space so that when you go in, you can just calmly and with your own time mark your ballot according to your wishes.
What happens, and this did happen in the last election and created a bit of a controversy, if a party drops a candidate after the ballots have been printed, it may say the party's name next to the name of the candidate, even if that person has been dropped by that party. How does Elections Canada treat that situation, and what's your advice to voters in those sorts of scenarios?
It's very clear in the law that there's a deadline for when candidates have to put their name forward. And when they put their name forward, they are either running as an independent or they are running for a party, and they must have an endorsement from the party. If at the deadline, the candidate has submitted all of the correct documentation and an endorsement from the party, we need to then prepare the ballots because we have to get them ready for advance polls. And at that point, it can't be changed. So even if after that deadline, a party decided to drop a candidate or a candidate decides to withdraw, it's too late. Their name would appear on the ballot. In a case like that, it does kind of fall to the elector to be aware of who they want to vote for and to know that they are still an active candidate. Because at that point, it's too late to change the ballot.
Yeah, and it would be up to the party or the candidate themselves to make that clarity to voters ahead of voting day. The longest ballot protest is back, and this time they're targeting the riding of Carleton, which happens to be the riding of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. For those who are unfamiliar, this is an attempt to try and shed light on the issue of electoral reform, and the protest basically sees dozens and dozens of people sign up to run in a single riding, creating a very long ballot. It can be quite disruptive. So how many people have signed up to run in Carleton, and what are the challenges, and how will Elections Canada handle this?
The number of candidates on the ballot in Carleton, I believe, has now reached 91. That's not a record. There were 91 candidates in a by-election in La Salle, Verdun, in September of 2024. And I think there was also a fairly large number at a by-election in Toronto a few years back. So it's not the first time that we have seen this. Elections Canada has had to make adaptations. One of the biggest ones is that we have to create a ballot that will accommodate 91 names. We can do that, and we will do that. But it does cause some concern, and the Chief Electoral Officer has spoken out about this to Parliament because it's up to Parliament to change the law. Right now, the law does allow this number of candidates. But the concern on our part is accessibility, because for some voters, that's really hard to come in and be presented with this very long ballot and need to find the candidate that they want to vote for. So we try to reduce those challenges as much as we can. It also causes a problem for resources because the size of the ballot means we have to have more secure ballot boxes sitting there waiting. And at the end of the night, it takes longer to count. So we are going to be putting some measures in place before the election night count to make sure maybe we have a few extra teams in place. What we want is for Canadians to know the result, at least the preliminary result of an election in a riding as much as possible on election night.
And then finally, is it possible after the writs are signed for all 343 ridings across the country, and I know the common term is drop the writ, but that's not actually what happens. The writs are signed and it's for all ridings across the country. Is it possible for an election to be postponed in any way, whether that be nationally or specific to ridings?
There are some very specific circumstances under the Canada Elections Act where the Chief Electoral Officer could postpone an election. And usually it would only be by a day or two. I don't think it's happened. It certainly hasn't happened in recent history. And the best example would be, I know there are places like Red River in Manitoba where if flooding happens and people have to be evacuated right around Elections Day, we can't set up a poll. First off, we can't get people to work there. We don't have a physical space. Everything's been flooded out. We don't have a place to set up a table and have a couple of people. So in a situation like that, there could be the option. There is the ability of the Chief Electoral Officer maybe to postpone a vote in just a riding or just in a small area to accommodate those people who, through no fault of their own, have been forced out of their homes due to something like a fire or a flood. And that would ensure that their votes were counted and that they got to cast their ballot. But I think what would be much, much more rare would be a full election canceled. It is within the realm of possibility that an election within a small electoral district might be, but probably not on a national level.
Yeah, and I'll note we had an election in 2021 while a pandemic was underway and precautions were taken there. So it takes a lot more than a pandemic to cancel an election in Canada. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, we always say to people, because life's busy, you've got work, you've got kids, you've got all kinds of things going on in your life, make a plan. So if those voting days, Easter weekend, Election Day, April 28th, aren't going to work for you, think about voting by special ballot. It's a quick trip into the returning office in your neighborhood with your ID, and you could do it there. If you're going to vote on the advanced polls or election day, make sure you have that voter card with you. And before you go to the polls, reach in, get your wallet out and say, what ID do I have? And just make sure when you go to the polls, you've got everything you need. That means you won't be frustrated. We can process you faster. You can cast your ballot and can be on your way.
Dianne, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
That was Dianne Benson with Elections Canada giving us Voting 101, answering some questions about the voting process and election law here in Canada. Remember to cast your ballots on or before April 28th. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.